Welcome to 247 Real Talk. I'm your host, Julian Perry. It's a pleasure to be here with you for another week of the 247 Real Talk podcast. I hope you had a great week. If you were here on the Eastern Seaboard, we had some really cold days last week. I was so cold, and I hate the cold after being here for so many years. So for me, it was a bit of a miserable time, but I managed to make the best of it, and hopefully you did too, wherever you are. We had a little bit of snow where other parts around the tri-state area got a lot more, so I'm thankful for that. And here we are for another week. Last time we spoke, I mentioned that this week I would talk a little bit about the wars in the world and where we're heading. One of the questions my good buddy and biggest supporter sent to me was, are we on the cusp of World War III? As I started to look around social media and the news and internet, I realized there are a lot more people talking about World War III than we would like. And a lot of us are walking around oblivious to what's going out there in the world. So when I come back, we're going to chat about it a little bit more. And I'll be right back. So welcome back to the 247 Real Talk podcast. Again, it's a pleasure to be here with you as always. I continue to thank you for your support as I watch the channel grow and I learn more about you. I continue to encourage you to like and to share and to subscribe and to ask other people to subscribe and join the conversation that we have and we are having. For those of you I've seen who have gone to Facebook and Instagram and other social media platforms and have shared my podcast for me, I appreciate you, and I ask more of you to do the same, because if we all do that, back in the old days, I remember when you go to church and they were trying to build a bigger congregation, they would challenge the members like, next week, each one of you bring a friend. So I'll challenge you each week, each one of you share with a friend who's not already on this platform, and let's get going. So into the meat of this matter, it won't be a long podcast because there's not really that in-depth detail I can share with you at this point, but just my personal thoughts. It wasn't until my friend sort of prompted me to put some more thought into this that I really paid attention and realized that the people who are out there on the internet talking about the possibility of World War III are not crazy. Very quietly, and some places loudly around the world, there's been a lot of conflicts brewing. I mentioned one that I'm sure many of you didn't know about, and that is the issue with President Maduro in Venezuela and his attempt to forcibly take some land that belongs to Guyana, South America. United States got involved, and eventually, I think right now, the United Kingdom has a warship parked outside his door in South America, just in case he needs a reminder that the rest of the world is not on his side on this. But as you think about what you've heard in the news about American ships and Iran and shooting down and missiles from was it the Houthis, and people who are pirating American ships as they take their cargo back and forth, and it's a daily conflict. You hear about the daily interactions. You realize that these little fires are becoming bigger and bigger fires, and they're surrounding us. So as we try to put some context to what the possibilities are, I'm going to turn my head slightly for those of you on YouTube. I'm going to look at my monitor here, and I'm going to scroll through a list that I pulled up that lists the top 10 conflicts or crisis to pay attention to in the world in 2024 so far. And it starts off, of course, with the Gaza situation, Israel and Palestine. a war that has gotten completely out of control. I think the last count, there was 25 or 30,000 Palestinians dead. I don't know when you stop taking lives, when we as human beings can find peace with each other. And normally I think there would be a bigger response, forceful response by nations, and there's a lot of reasons why I think that's not happening to the extent it should to stop this war. But I have some thoughts and I'll share them with you as I go through this episode. So we know about Israel and Gaza, the Gaza conflict. We know Israel and Hamas and Palestinians. It's been in the forefront of the news, parallel to Ukraine and Russia. That war between Israel and Hamas has the potential to go on for a very long time. And at the end of it, the numbers of lives lost will be staggering. The next thing mentioned here on this list is a wider Middle East war. And I understand that because there are issues right now with Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Iran that we have not been paying attention to as we should. Tehran has been stoking the fire. There's been conflict between the U.S. blaming Iran, Iran blaming the U.S. And that, as we know, if we think back to when the Desert Storm and the Iraqi War, the thousands upon thousands of troops that ended up there, American troops, and the thousands that died. And that was one war in one place. I think at the same time we were in Afghanistan too, but we didn't have as many troops in Afghanistan. So, but at the same time, we saw the military here actively recruiting because we were involved in two major conflicts. So there's a potential there for this to raise its ugly head again. As they say here, neither Iran nor and its non-state allies, nor the United States and Israel want a regional confrontation. But there are plenty of ways that the Israel-Hamas war could trigger a wider war in the Middle East. And in some ways, the war plays right into the hands of Iran. Now, I haven't delved into this as I should to give you a more educated opinion. So I'm just touching the surface here and just letting you know what's going on as we wake up and go to sleep and go to work every day, what's going on in the rest of the world. There is, what I'm reading is Sudan. So in April, friction between the Sudanese military factions, the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces erupted in an all-out war. Their fighting since then has left thousands of people dead. How many of you in 2024 knew that thousands of people, we're only in January, are dying in Sudan war right now? Unless you pay attention, you won't recognize that this is another conflict that's going on in the world. So we've covered the Israel, Hamas. We've covered the possibility of a wider war that may trigger. We've covered Sudan. Okay, moving along in the list, there is the Ukraine war. Right now, this is also a war that has claimed countless lives. This is a war that will certainly leave much, I think, like the Israeli Hamas war. I think that this Ukraine-Russia war will change the face of what those two countries look like forever. There doesn't seem to be an end in sight. From my personal opinion, it seems that the Russian armies had not practiced war for a long time, and certainly underestimated the resolve of the Ukrainians. And now they're in a bogged-down battle where Ukraine has got widespread support and is getting supplies both in weapons and in everything else they need. And this conflict can go on for a very long time. The next on the list is Myanmar. And they're apparently the troops. I'm looking to see exactly the Myanmar, or Myanmar as you pronounce it, military using airstrikes, artillery, and mobile units to put down uprisings and punish civilians. And for the first time in decades, violence engulfed their lowlands. So here we have these are ethnically armed groups fighting against each other. We know that when you have ethnic groups fighting against each other, those are long, drawn out, embedded wars. That any time if another country, another body gets involved, it can erupt because every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And again, some of these I was not even aware of, but I'll continue to go through the list. Ethiopia. Well, I've followed this from time to time. Okay. Africa has been, unfortunately, had many conflicts with rebels and a lot of killings and murders and rapes that the rest of the world, the Western world, doesn't care about. They don't, and that's a whole other episode. But you don't hear the atrocities that continue to go on in that part of the world every single day. They seem unimportant to the rest of the world, but they exist. And people are brutalized and murdered in numbers. The rebel forces against the military forces, it is brutal. I've seen a few documentaries on it, and it's nothing fun. It's nothing that you can turn a blind eye to once you've investigated and understand the brutalities that are going on there. So from Ethiopia, we go down to, and I don't know, the Sahel. This is Niger's military toppled Mohab Bazoum, a reformist president friendly with the West, cementing army rule across Sahel region. After coups in Mali and Burkina Faso, the officers in power have promised to curb violence, tearing apart the countryside. Waves of coups heralds a new chapter of crisis dating back to at least 2012. So these are things that you should be following up, listening to me, and doing some research on. Now, I am not showing you on YouTube what I'm reading because I'm uncertain about the copyright laws, right? I'm reading this from someone else's record who has done research, and without copyright permissions, I don't want to run into that sort of issue. Another one that we've heard a lot of is Haiti. So let's talk about Haiti a bit. Haitians hope that foreign forces set to arrive early in 2024 will tackle the hyper-violent gangs that over the past few years have torn the country apart. But the Kenyan police, set to lead the planned mission, have their work cut out against heavily armed groups in dense shanty towns, particularly given the disarray in Haitian politics. So we've known there's been conflict in Haitian politics for a long time. The previous president was murdered. That was something that was all over the news. He was killed in his own house. His wife was shot. And that country's been torn apart for a while. But it is a region of conflict, and it is a land that shares a land border with, I believe, Dominican Republic. So the potential there exists, even though they're isolated in terms of being surrounded by water. I'm gonna try to pronounce this. I remember seeing this. Armenia, Azerbaijan, I think it's pronounced. Azerbaijan's lightning offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh prompted exodus of almost all of those living there, more than 100,000 people. So in that part of the world, won't dwell further because I don't have the history on it, but we will come back to this. Has a conflict. Now, this is an interesting one. U.S. and China, right? That's always right on the brink because of Taiwan. And I think Taiwan just elected a new president who is sort of pro democracy. So the president was just elected, but we have to see where that goes because the U.S. has supported Taiwan, and China, U.S. are what I would think would be the real two superpowers in the world. We've seen, even though Russia is fighting Ukraine with a number of troops, a large number of troops, we've seen that their capabilities are diminished. And because they're in that war, they certainly can't, they don't have the resources to do anything else right now. So we won't, in that category of superpowers, include them at this point. We'll say China and the US, and Taiwan is a ticking bomb in the middle. So we've gone through that list. It didn't mention the one I mentioned, which is Venezuela and Guyana in the region. And I'll tell you a little bit about that because I researched that when I was more intimate with that one. In 1899, there was a treaty that was signed between Venezuela and Guyana, agreeing that the International Court of Justice would make a final decision. But from at that point until the International Court of Justice made a decision, the region that's called Essequibo in Guyana would be part of Guyana. Now, the story goes, and I have not, and forgive me, like I said, I didn't intend to go this place in my mind, but the story goes at one point, the territory was part of Venezuela, and there was something where the British took the territory from them. Irrespective of, apparently, in 1899, Venezuela agreed to this treaty. The issue here is since 1899, it's come up a few times, but over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of drilling off of the coast of Guyana and off the coast of Essequibo. And lo and behold, the largest oil find, I think they have now called it the largest oil find in the history of the world, has been found. There were companies that didn't want to go in, but eventually I think ExxonMobil, along with a partnership with Hess, went in. And they've been pumping oil now. And all of a sudden, Guyana, even though the Guyana is rich and potentially getting richer every day. So now Venezuela is saying, hey, this territory is ours again, which is normal, right? It's a deeper conflict I can tell you a little bit about, like I said, because I know a bit about it. Because when President Biden went into office, he lifted some of the sanctions that have been crushing Venezuela for years. The president of Venezuela, President Maduro, is a dictator. And part of the agreement for U.S. lifting sanctions was releasing certain prisoners, U.S. people that were held prison in Venezuela, and also agreeing to free and fair elections this year, 2024. Now, following what we know about President Maduro, there's no such thing as free and fair elections, and he will find a way around that, I'm sure. But many believe that the whole explosion of his attitude towards going to try to invade Guyana and take this territory again is a distraction from what he has promised as part of, agreed to as part of the treaty, as part of the lifting of sanctions by the U.S. that has to happen this year. Now, President Maduro oppresses and suppresses any opposition leader. I've been told stories there. If an opposition leader goes to a store and goes to buy anything in a store, and the store sells it to that opposition leader, the next day, the henchmen for President Maduro go and shut that store down for good. Same thing with restaurants, any kind of business. He jails anyone opposing him. There's consequences to opposing him. So it'd be interesting to see in 2024, which is the same time that we're going to have the elections in the United States, how this will all play out and what Venezuela will do. I'm still on the fence about whether lifting sanctions was the right thing, because I think that Venezuela also has a massive oil find oil fields that have not seen their potential because of this sanctions. I believe Chevron has been down, is the company of majority down there in terms of oil, and lifting the sanctions caused, I think, a lot of people in America to start doing business with Venezuela. And I think there's a potential now that if they stop, if the sanctions are reinstated, it's going to hurt many Americans who now have, lots of finances tied up with Venezuela. So we'll see what happens. But the bottom line is this: look, we get up every day, we go to work, we go to school, we go to lunch, we go here, we go there, the supermarket, all these places. And life requires that kind of attention from us for us to have what we would term a decent life. There are so many other distractions, even locally, financial distractions. We've got a messy political climate where people are hating each other over candidates who don't even know they exist. We've got a level of crime. We've got this level of homelessness. We've got this level of racism and systemic racism and prejudice. And people are struggling financially in different parts of this country. And just to make ends meet, I mean, you've heard me talk about my wife and I pulling our kids out of the school system and homeschooling because parents have to worry about that too. The fact that their kids are not getting the education they could and they should. The fact that they're dealing with bullyism in school that's causing some kids to take their lives. The fact that they're receiving information that parents don't think they're ready to impart upon their children, but because parents have to be so distracted with survival, schools and others, strangers, are raising our kids. The schools, many of whom have lockdowns several times a month or sometimes a year because of an active shooter in the neighborhood. And then you come home and you've got to deal with the fact that you're still struggling to find a job that you can support your family and yourself, and you're dealing with student loans. And you're dealing with politicians who refuse to give you a break, even though they got millions of dollars in PPP loans forgiven, and they need so much to be looking down on you. They need so much to have power over you. They need so much to feel a joy within knowing that they are crushing you and you are subjected to them. That the same people who got the forgiveness of loans are the same people that are saying no to millions of Americans who are struggling to survive. When you put all that together, we have enough on our plates that none of us wants to hear about World War III. None of us wants to hear about one conflict that's going on in the world. Many of us are involved in fighting or fighting causes to stop the violence that's going on in Israel and Russia and Ukraine and all these places. But there's so many more of us who simply can't be bothered. Either we can't be bothered because our lives are so filled with the struggle for survival that we don't have space to in our minds for anything else to occupy. And then there are those that don't care because they're selfish, and quite frankly, whether war was going on or not, they're so self-absorbed that their world is this small, a small circle around them. Then there are those who are looking for gain and greed and see all the financial gains that can be made during times of conflict and war. And believe me, during times of conflict and war, there are massive profits made by rich people. This is why people were so upset when and this started when President Trump and then President Biden continued to pull out U.S. troops from Afghanistan. 20 years in Afghanistan. Do you know how filthy rich many companies and people got off of that war? In terms of providing supplies and arms and all these things that go into maintaining troops and a war abroad. So we have those who will want to steal our peace for their financial gain, their greed. What bothers me the most is as I've gotten older, and unfortunately I've gone through the shock of attending funerals, and seeing people I knew of different personalities, some nice, some not so nice, or whatever. I still honor them. But seeing them in the state of when we leave this world, if you ever focus on that for a moment, you have to ask yourself, what are we fighting for and why? Is there a prize at the end of the road that if you win the war, then you get to live forever in riches and in your yacht and you don't ever go old and you don't ever get gray? What is it exactly that you're fighting for? What is it that we're okay with tens of thousands of people? And at this point, I want to say between all the wars that are going on, we're probably talking about millions of people. And with the 10 wars I listed, the 10 conflicts, and probably a few more that are not listed, around the world, and you consider Russia, and you consider Israel, and you consider Africa, millions of people losing their lives. For what? Does the person or persons who choose to go to war really believe that when they're done, whatever they gain if they win makes them immortal? Do they think that they cheat death by taking the life of someone else? How did we get to a place as human beings that we seriously lost any sense of reality and common sense? Biblically, even World War III is predicted. And I think that's because if we look at the natural progression of man, whether you believe and you're spiritual or you're not, mankind, if you look back in history and you look to where we are today, mankind was always had a segment of evil. And just as good people have struggled and have pushed forward to become more powerful in their goodness, in their charity, in their kindness, evil people have worked hard to become more evil and more powerful so they can do more evil. We can't escape it. So the answer to my friend's question is, are we heading to World War III? Yes, I think we are. The question is, though, not if, it's more about when. Because getting to World War III to the point where the whole world will punish, I think is some distance away. But I think the reason that so many people are talking about it is because there's such a critical, fragile balance right now that any one thing by one of these major players can change everything and plunge us into World War III. We have to elect leaders who are careful to act and act with the intention of preservation of human life. We have to stand together as good, for the fight of good against evil will always exist. This is not an episode to scare you. This is an episode to wake you up. When you listen to this episode, go jump on Google and start looking at the list of, type in the 10 most critical conflicts in the world in 2024. And take a deep read, as I will do too, because I pulled up this list right before I came on this episode, and I learned a lot just reading with you. But there's also a lot I don't know. Some of the countries, the names I couldn't pronounce, I didn't realize that there are conflicts going there where tens of thousands of people are dying. And it's just a matter of time as in some places evil is winning right now, that the conflict explodes. One action, one mistake. In this entire list I read, I never even mentioned North Korea. One action, one act of violence can change whatever balance we have right now that's keeping us out of a conflict like World War III. The responsibility is a huge one as to who we choose, not only in America, but around the world as leaders. Not people who with tempers, not people who are quick to act with violence, not people who believe in their superiority, that they've lost the ability to conflict resolution via conversation. This is something that exists not only that puts our world in peril in terms of the international stage, but this is the same thing we deal with when we speak with our kids. This is the same thing we deal with when the teachers teach in school. It's the same thing you deal with when you go to work every day on your job. All of these places are conflict resolution practices, and we must get them right. There is too much violence in the world. I've looked at what's gone on in New York over the past year. And it seems like I listen to 1010 Wins every day and I get the updates on my phone. And it seems that in the belly of New York, violence has erupted. It just hasn't really touched the lives of when I say the right person, I mean the person who can cause those who have the ability and power to make a difference to take notice. But unfortunately, in our lives, whether you're good or bad, the things that exist around us don't discriminate. And they can touch good people or bad people. We must have this conversation. We must learn to unite in a cause and start dealing with causes. I make the effort to record these podcasts each week because it's a way for me to plead with you, to get involved. When I say share the episode, it's because if you share it to 15 people, 10 of the people might be, I don't care, but 5 of those people might say, I do. Even one. And as they see the effort I make and they're willing to join the cause, this is how change comes about. Think about the civil rights movement. Think about every time in our history where there's been effective change, that even though it didn't reach all its goals, it made things better to the point that you and I can enjoy whatever we do enjoy today in our lives. You can't just sit back and let the rest of the world try to do the work alone. I can't alone. You have to get involved. You've got to carve out a few minutes of your life each day or each week or however you choose to do it, to do something, a positive action that will make a difference. And I plead with you to join me. As always, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you, to share my thoughts, and I'm humbled to have your support. Do have a fantastic weekend and week ahead. And next week we'll bring up and talk about some other topic that's not only important to us, but important to the lives of our children and those to come. Before I leave the episode this week, I want to say that most of you may have heard that Dr. Martin Luther King's son died of, I believe it was either prostate or colon cancer some time in the past week. As you know, Dr. Martin Luther King was instrumental, was beyond instrumental, was the reason that I can sit here and have this conversation with you right now. Freedoms that we enjoy because he stood up for us to be free. His son is an important part of his legacy. So Dexter Scott King, may he rest in peace. Until the next time, take care of yourselves. Please, take care of each other. you.